Welcome to Our Alternative, a podcast bringing you what started as heated family discussions on the couch and evolved into a vision for a better future for us all. As form concepts fell to pieces on the 7th of October, and as one of the reasons for the attack was the misconception that we were crumbling from within, we all agree a change is needed. We have to find an alternative.
Hi, Abba.
Hello, Yelip.
We last spoke about the two principles. We spoke about how we say outright that anywhere that we go in military and take back by force, we say it's ours forever.
And
not
it's ours
returning.
and it stays ours. No more trying to conquer places, sacrificing so much and then just trying to get out of it because we don't know what to do with it. The Goyim have to know that conquer now, we're not leaving.
And the second thing we have to hold is that as soon as we're in, we're on a timer from a military rule transferring into taking civilian authority, being responsible for the people that are within.
Yeah, I'll clarify that. What I meant was that military rule itself, obviously critical, is in itself of very little use. You have to have military rule, but it's not sufficient afterwards to say you've really conquered. Real conquest is civilian rule, which means civilian responsibility. You can't rule as a civilian authority, administration, unless you primarily conquer first. Having said that, conquering on its own, military rule on its own, which is what our government talks about morning, noon, and night, is pretty much a waste of time because it's all as a matter of time before eventually you leave. And then you inevitably leave behind a vacuum which is inhabited by worse people, by worse actors than you found there in the first place. So it's about time we stopped this going in, conquering and leaving and thinking that whilst we're there, if we could only rule them militarily, we'll buy peace forever. It doesn't work. And history, time after time after time, has shown us in the last 75 years that it just doesn't work. So instead of repeating the same mistake time and time again, what we're going to be talking about now is doing things a little bit differently. I call it Jewish international morality because I believe these principles are deeply embedded in Jewish political thought. And that's not what we're talking about. That's what we have shiurim for on Shabbat. But the upshot of these principles is the Goyim need to know that if we are dragged in to fight in somebody else's lands, if we have to spend our so precious blood conquering, we're not leaving, not now, not tomorrow, and not ever. And if we have conquered, that means as well that we have taken upon ourselves the responsibility primarily for the people. And we have to also understand, as the rabbis have told us many times, that when you take upon yourself responsibility for another human being, you buy a master, kana adan latzmo. You buy yourself a real headache, but that's the moral challenge of being in charge. That's the moral challenge of ruling justly. And really, all what we're going to be talking about in the next few discussions is how are we supposed to rule justly?
So what is going on today in Gaza? How have we begun to conquer? What does this mean that we're going to change?
Well, I'd like to put into 4 simple war aims, which enable us to understand where we're up to and what we need to be doing after each stage. But it also helps us see the bigger picture, not get stuck on a specific problem. But before I do so, I want to make light a little of the government's described or self-defined war aims. I think now I'm not the only one. I think there's a majority of people with common sense in this country who realize that the idea of lemotet et Hamas, to destabilize the Hamas, to take away their military might, to kill A, B, C, or D, are all very secondary goals. Secondary in the sense that they're very important, but they're not long-lasting. I mean, you can kill Sinar and Def and a few others, but then their brothers and cousins and friends with similar or dissimilar names pop up and we're back to square one. You can destroy the tunnels and destroy all the missiles and all their equipment and destabilize their military functioning ability. And then in 2 years' time, you find that Qatar has given them $300-400 million or $2 or $3 billion and rebuilt it far more dangerous than it is today. Every time we do that, we end up worse off than we were today. So those goals sound great. They're the sort of things that generals like. But I think we've also learned that generals are not the people we need to be looking for strategic or political advice.
So our first goal is no good. Lemotet et Hamas. You can't just wipe out an idea.
Yeah, everybody seems to understand Hamas is an idea. You can't wipe out an idea. And so you destroy their missiles. So certain Arab countries will give them more and better missiles in a year's time. What have you done? You've patted yourself on the back, but deluded nobody but yourself. So you've smashed up all their infrastructure. So tomorrow morning you're leaving and they'll build it again. It'll take them a few months, a few years. It'll be worse afterwards than it is today. It'll be more modern, more difficult, more dangerous to us than it was. So what really should be Ya'adei Milchama? And remember, we were hit in a way which we haven't been hit since the establishment of the State of Israel. And that is, you can neither be forgotten nor ignored when we plan out for ourselves the real stages, the real Ya'adei Milchama, which I'm now going to enumerate. And they are, in my understanding, 4. They are lichbosh, to conquer, and I'll explain what I mean in a moment. They are, no less importantly and specifically today, linkom, to take vengeance for what was done to us. And then we can stop the war. Then we need to find something really critical in order to stop a war, which is a visual, literally a picture or a video, which tells us and tells the world we won. Then we haven't finished yet. Then we have to go on and learn how liyashev. How do we rebuild, repopulate? We, the emphasis on us, not the Qatarim, not the Egyptians, not some other Rishonim. How do we do it? And I fully understand that we can neither allow the Arabs back to where they were, nor do I believe we can yet allow Jews. So what do we do? Because an area will not stand vacant. And lastly, we need to ask the hardest question of all. We'll still be left with 1.8, 2 million Arabs. We have to address, why isn't the idea of Hagira Miratzon, voluntarily transfer, a good idea? And we'll discuss that. And then if it's not a good idea, what do we do with them? How do we start learning the difficult art of ruling people justly in a way which starts resolving issues which we've been avoided for the last 75 years? So those are the 4 stages. Lichbosh, to conquer. Linkom, to take vengeance. Then we need a visual that we've won. And that can be done very, very quickly. It's got to be behind us by Pesach. Then we need to understand Ech liyashev, how to settle and how to rebuild that strip of land. And finally, and most importantly, how do we limshol? How do we rule? Not lishlot, but limshol. There's a difference. Not to rule so much. You know what? Let's use a different word. But how to govern. Lishlot means to rule. Limshol means to govern. How do we learn to govern those difficult and morally deficient people so that, as we will discuss it eventually, we, the whole area, becomes a blessing, not just to ourselves, but to the whole area and maybe to the whole of Kodesh Baruch Hu's world. How do we do it? And today, for the last few minutes of our discussion, let me just focus on the first, easy to understand, lichbosh, linkom, to conquer, and then to take vengeance. Well, once you've understood the principles, Yelet, that we discussed last conversation about when you conquer, it's ours, I think lichbosh requires very little further explanation. It's ours. It's going to be our military responsibility, military rule, and it's also going to be our civilian responsibility. And we'll talk about that in the last lecture. And we want to carry on and finish the job where we're up to now, but I will be suggesting, particularly in our next discussion, that we don't go into Rafiach. What I would like to see is that we finish off the very difficult and complex, and at the moment brilliantly executed plan of conquering Khan Yunis and the other camps, refugee camps adjacent to it. We go down a little bit southward and we stop about 5 kilometers from the border, not conquering Rafiach. That doesn't mean we don't go down further. On both sides of Rafiach, there's strips of land between Rafiach Central and the sea, and between Rafiach Central and the Israeli border. We obviously need to make sure that both those strips are under our military supervision. We close them from above and from two sides. And I think that if we don't go into Rafiach now, and in our next lecture I'll be saying why not and what would the alternative, we then can use that to reach a diplomatic understanding with the Egyptians that for a full kilometer along what was Tzir Philadelphia, instead of 100 meters, a full 1,000 meter width from the Egyptian border until Rafiach Central, there should be a strip of land under joint Israeli-Egyptian control, which, even though it won't be hermetically sealed off, together with the Egyptians who have some interest to make sure that no further trouble happens immediately, even though one certainly can't rely on them in the medium or long term, we will make it very, very difficult, but not impossible, for the Hamas to move munitions and prisoners under the border into Egypt or from Egypt into Rafiach. It won't seal it off, but it'll make it very, very hard. So we'll finish the conquering side of this war with us taking the area above Rafiach to both sides of Rafiach, including blocking them from going to the sea, and having an agreement with the Egyptians as much as possible, able to blockade and to stop easy access via tunnels of more and more rockets into Rafiach.
So we're going to leave it up to the Egyptians to stop things moving from Rafiach into the rest of Gaza?
No, we're not. And we'll talk about that when we get onto the discussion about Liyashev. I wanted to draw a picture of how the kibush needs to end. From my understanding, and I watch the news like anybody else, we're very nearly there. Probably in 2 or 3 weeks, we can complete that part of the picture. But then we have to go to another critical stage before we can create the victory visual. And that is linkom. I don't think I need to explain to you or to any of our listeners why we need to take vengeance. We usually like to leave vengeance to God. I'm usually more than happy to say, El Nakamot Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a God of vengeance. It's his problem. I want to improve the world. Let him deal with the evil in it. But as Jews, we also know, and we're coming up to Purim, that sometimes, very, very infrequently, we're faced with true evil, real moral depravity. And then we are not allowed to avert our gaze. We're not allowed to say, you God, it's your problem. We have to deal with it ourselves. And if we don't do it, then we ourselves become in some way guilty, implicit in leaving that evil around, that evil to be visible. And I think it would be hard to argue that what the Arabs did on the 7th, 8th of October wasn't true evil. It was as low as a human being can go. What should we do? Well, in Jewish thought, as you know, when you find Amalek or Sodom V'Amorah, you wipe them out. But we're not in the business of wiping people out. I don't mind attacking as hard as we need when the army's fighting, and certainly the Jewish rules of war are slightly different than the pseudo-Jewish Christian rules of war, which don't work and haven't worked anywhere. But even so, we are Rachmanim bnei Rachmanim. No Jewish person, or very few, can seriously entertain the idea of wiping out, wantonly human beings, even if they are as bad as the vast majority of the Azatians are. So what do we wipe out? How do we make a point that we have machaknu, macho et zecher Amalek, that we've erased something, we've done our bit in cleansing the world of this moral stain? And this is my proposal. Throughout the Tanakh, you find that when you want to start a new leaf, you change the name. There is, in Ritzuat Aza, there is a city Aza. It's somewhere, it's been conquered at the outset of the war. It's somewhere under Bet Hanin and Bet Lahia. There was a city Aza. According to Dover Tzal, 80 to 85% of the buildings are destroyed or are put out of use. And over 90% of the population has gone down southwards. So let's finish the job. Let's make sure the last 10% leave and knock down all the buildings. And here is our mechika. Here is our erasing. Here is our nekama. No more Ir Aza, a city which has stood for over 3,500 years. It's mentioned many times in the Tanakh, goes. And let the world understand what happens when you commit a Chilul Hashem against the Jewish people, when you desecrate the Kadosh Baruch Hu's people in this world. When you shame the Jewish people, your cities not only are hit hard and then they can be rebuilt, they are disappeared, they are erased forever. And eventually, as we'll talk about in the chapter of Yishuv, eventually something new will be there with a new name. The Ir Aza goes, no more Aza. And I believe to all those anti-Semites and Arabs around us That's a far more telling, a far more meaningful vengeance than killing Yechia or killing Def or his brothers and cousins and aunts and uncles. They don't care a damn about all that, or knocking down a few more buildings or destroying a few more old rockets only to be resupplied later. We wipe out a city and we rebrand it. The world will understand. No more Gaza City. A little bit like what Rashi says, that if you have an Amalek, make sure that nobody can say, this donkey comes from Amalek. Nobody able to say, this car was found in Amalek. Forgive me, this car was found in Uzzah. It's gone. It's no longer there. We'll call it something else. And that can happen pretty quickly. We're so close to doing it. It needs a declarative ability. It needs us to say it rather than so much to do it.
Wow. So we've created a visual.
Yeah, and here comes the visual. And this is where I want to end up. Everybody knows that to succeed, you have to show success. 1,000 pictures worth 1,000 words. It's important for us. It's dramatically important for the whole world as well. Here's a simple visual. Whilst we're spending the next 6 weeks surrounding Rafiah, take an area we've conquered already in the center of Gaza. Get our big bulldozers to clear an area of 1 kilometer and 1 kilometer. I don't care if there are tunnels underneath. A parking lot. Put a white fence round it with the signs Kan Bonim in Hebrew, English, and Arabic. And in the middle, an Israeli, desolate, an Israeli flagpole with an Israeli flag flying from the pole. That's the visual. Kan Haya Aza. And it's gone because of what they did. And you should know, anybody, that if you dare do that, or even think of doing that again to the Jewish people, that will be your fate as well. You will disappear, and your cities will be no more. It's so doable. It doesn't cost us anything, but it is such a powerful statement. And it's one which now, mamash, in the lead up to Purim, is so meaningful and possible, and I think so important to do. So that's how we create the visual, which ends the first part of the war, the lichbosh, the linkom. And next discussion, we'll start talking about what do we do with the area? Because if you leave it a vacuum, they'll all stream back tomorrow, and all these ideas of vengeance, all these ideas of erasing names will disappear with the tides of history. How do we change things permanently?
Thank you, Abba.
A pleasure, darling.